Hey, this is Cedric, your host of the Bitcoin Matrix podcast. This episode with Phil Gibson about SBF, FTX, the WEF, and the Davos crowd is brought to you by River Financial. Phil has some incredibly interesting takes on what is really going on here. So I hope that you guys stick around and enjoy this rip as much as I did. Securely buy Bitcoin, zero fee dollar cost average, and purchase hosted mining rigs at river.com. I've been using River for over 2 years because they are a Bitcoin only company that is hyper focused on customer service, security, and the future of money. So easy to do and set up, my 80-year-old mother can do it. To get started, use the link in the show notes to get up to $10,000 free when you buy Bitcoin and miners at river.com. And now, let's enter the Bitcoin Matrix with Phil Gibson, aka Mr. Pseu, to find out all about the offshore dollar market, the war on stablecoins, and who really crashed FTX and why.
What is real? How do you define real?
You can't jump into cash. Cash is trash. What do? You get out.
Phil Gibson, aka Mr. Pseu, is a Bitcoin musician, podcaster, content creator, and hodler. You can catch him on the Bitcoin Made Simple podcast, his music video ETF, and on his Substack QPOL, where he is saying the quiet part out loud. Whether it's macro, geopolitics, culture, etc., talking both politics and economics, Austrian economics, Phil thinks that nuance is key, and don't be afraid to change your views or you won't grow. He's your guide to digging for the truth. Phil Gibson, welcome back to the Bitcoin Matrix podcast for the third time, my friend. How are you?
Third time's a charm, Seth. I'm stoked to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man, I'm super excited to get into this. I've been loving the threads that you've been putting out and the angle that you've been bringing to, I'll even just cue it off, this SBF, STX, WEF madness. There's just a lot going on here. But maybe we can just break it down a bit. Like, maybe you could tell me, like, I know I threw a few names out there, but like who was involved and sort of what were the base motivations here?
Yeah, definitely. So if anyone reads the article, as we were saying before we started recording, I kind of throw out with tweets I find on Twitter, like, sure, here's who SBF is. Here's even like a little 2-minute video or 90-second video of the whole saga. And as you've had on the show, Tom Longo, I see myself as a student. In fact, as silly as it sounds, his recent podcast he did, he actually gave me like a soft shout out, like my Padawan Phil Gibson uses the term ODM for offshore dollar. I was like, yes, my life's complete. That's all I need. But a lot of this was an extension of what him and I and others on his Slack server talked about. And so when I was writing this article, I kind of had a brain fart and I was almost done at the end. So I just like got up, got something to eat, drink, whatever, and then just had my head clear. And then was just kind of like, oh, okay, this is it. I'm going to make a tweet thread, just like bang out the last bit and just really kind of like the TLDR of what happened, what really matters. And so that's where I think the thread that I wrote really consolidates everything that does matter. So the thread, I titled it a thread on who really crashed FTX and why. So, of course, SBF, Sam Bankman-Fried, bankster, fraud, whatever the hell you want to call him. I believe that he was owned and operated by Davos. The Davos crowd, the European oligarchs coming from old money, World Economic Forum, like we get that. And SBF was a front, or FTX, the exchange, was a front for offshore dollars, or the ODM, as I like to call it. And again, as people recall from the last couple of times I've been on here, I'm going to get Tom on here, offshore dollars are dollars created out of the United States, beyond the Federal Reserve's jurisdiction, in a sense. Well, not really in a sense, because the commercial banks gave reserves-based euro money to these euro banks in exchange for euro debt. But in 2019, they closed that door to where they're not doing that anymore. But essentially, with those reserves, they could just fractional reserve print more money than the Fed itself could. And as Jerome Powell has been raising interest rates and as that he's been incentivizing people to take those reserves in banks out of the United States and in the United States and park them at an account at the Fed to gain interest. So he's pulling now over nearly $2.5 trillion of base zero money liquidity from the market, starving Davos of their power, which is the creation of money that everybody wants, dollars that is, and just starving them. And so they're looking for other means and mechanisms to not go bankrupt. And the extension of that are stablecoins. FTT was a stablecoin. And so just looking back at these incentives of what's going on and who's doing what and why and who benefits from these actions, I and others came to the conclusion that the Federal Reserve, in tacit coordination with the BRICS nations, primarily China in this case, and CZ, who runs Binance, the number one global crypto exchange in the world, as a Chinese national born in China, if you don't think that he doesn't have ties to the Chinese government, I just think that's naive. And China is in BRICS, Russia's in BRICS, obviously, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, now Saudi Arabia. I think on the fence, Israel. I'm not sure. But you have all this bifurcation of global powers, as we've talked about. And you have this understanding that Davos just thinks of the global south as their dirt people, and they want them to make their things and do their things for them and clean their toilets, as Tom likes to call it. And you basically have them going their own way, creating a new monetary system to rival SWIFT and just be independent away from Davos and these European oligarchs that want to destroy the global south and take over the world island. And that's why this goes back to this Russophobia, just hatred of Russia, and have been trying to get the United States in a false flag war to fight Europe's war for them, just like they made us do in World War I and II. And once you get the Fed stimulating for war efforts, at this point, that's the only way that you get the Fed to pivot. But going back to the topic at hand, the Fed New York boys, I believe, worked with CZ to tank FTT, tank FTX as a revenge for stealing the election. Because they kind of had to wait for a moment for them to really prove that Davos, who runs Congress and all this, they actually did steal the election. So they kind of had to wait on the day that it happened. And plus, there was already an announcement. I forget where this tweet was, but there was supposed to be like a World Economic Forum-esque conference with SBF and Larry Fink and Bill Gates, I believe, and like others. That was going to happen, I think, on the 30th of November. But where it was basically like a celebratory thing after basically globalist Democrats kind of ran in and took all these seats with the hopes of doing the election. And honestly, I just believe this was kind of like a hit job, and we can just kind of go in deeper into the thread, but I'll just kind of stop there, and we can just kind of recoup what I've said and where you want to take this. And if not, we can just go back into the thread.
Yeah. Do you think we should maybe go back to the beginning of FTX though, and
sure,
SBF's origins? His oranges. What was it? The kimchi?
He is a vegan, so he probably liked oranges.
Right. So where did this guy come from?
Yeah, man. So he was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. He smart kid. He went to MIT. After MIT, he went to Jane Street internship for basically trading. He was a really great trader, but he basically kind of got into utilitarianism, which basically is basically the ends justify the means of doing whatever it takes for the sake of humanity, and is kind of dressed up altruism. And there is an extension of this called effective altruism, which, as I explained in the article, EAers basically believe that in order to achieve maximum good for society, one needs to make as much money as possible by taking the largest risks. And once said money is made, it needs to be given back and invested in the less fortunate parts of the world for the greater good of humanity. And so this whole EA craze is just, I believe, a front for similar ideals, which fall in line with the scholars and the Malthusian ideologues running the World Economic Forum. And everything that Bill Gates believes, and I can't pinpoint like the authors if who wrote like 20,000 page books on all this crap that Klaus Schwab and similar ilk believe, but it very much falls in line with painting a pretty picture of this ideology that young people can buy into, and just dressing up the commie Malthusian real motives. And so basically this is just an extension of that. If you do a further deep dive, I mean, both of his parents are Stanford graduates and have deep ties into the Democratic Party and the Biden administration. Sam Bankman-Fried, once he set up FTX, FTX basically became a money laundering front for the Democratic Party and just like globalists at all Davos, essentially. And there's a nice little diagram that I was able to find on the internet as well. But essentially, it was just a way to kind of like wash money. Oh, okay, I found it here. The great Dave Callum, I think, found this online somewhere too. But basically, it goes through U.S. tax money at work. So starting with Sam sending money to the Democratic Party, and super PACs, they send that to back Joe Biden. Joe Biden sends that over to the Ukraine for humanitarian causes and aid and sex trafficking and pedophilia and all this crap that has been happening for a good while. Don't forget funding of biolabs. And then money to the Ukraine would go back through FTX. So it was just like money washing and laundering and all this crap. And I believe he donated, I think, $40 million to the Democratic Party, or at least the
at least 50 million last year. Whatever.
Yeah. It's insane. And he, of course, didn't do all this himself, I believe, if you just look at his ties. This goes back to Gary Gensler. He as well. So the CEO of Alameda was basically like the firm who then out of that FTX was made as the exchange, because Sam can't be the CEO of both Alameda and FTX. So his girlfriend basically became CEO of Alameda instead, and Sam became CEO of FTX. But going back to his girlfriend, I think Caroline, she has MIT ties as well with Gary Gensler. Her father was a professor at MIT, and I think was boss to Gensler when he was teaching there as well. And Gensler is just like Davos as you can get. So there's just like ties of very high people up top. And essentially where this leads us is SBF was always compliant and pushing for compliance, and I think was trying to use that arm of compliance to reach out to every exchange. And this is kind of where Binance comes in. Now, Binance did fund FTX. I wish I had known this when I wrote this piece. Maybe I'll go back and edit it. But Binance was one of the backers of FTX, or investors.
Very early,
FTX. Yeah.
I found that very interesting.
Yeah. And
did you know that happened around the time, allegedly, I didn't do the research, but that around when Binance USA, or however you say Binance, lost their license in the States. So it looks like they then, okay, let's fund FTX and get our play there,
and we'll get compliant. Yeah. That is interesting. But what's more interesting is why did CZ basically go guns blazing and take this shit coin of FTT token to really just dump that and basically crash FTX. So let me see here. Any questions so far? Anything
Oh,
you
so
want to
many
add here?
questions, but if you want to keep going.
While I go through my notes. So a little bit about CZ, as I called him, a crypto tycoon genius. With Binance, there's no single headquarters. And so he set up a lot of different structures and companies set up in Asia and the US and elsewhere. And they're all following different jurisdictions. And so he's basically protected himself from regulatory capture and other foreign powers, which just gave him that opportunity to offer leverage products. And so similar probably leverage products that SBF was getting into, because the way SBF made his money is that he saw this arbitrage opportunity to where you were able to buy Bitcoin in America for $10,000, but then over in Asia it was 11,000, and so he was able to set up an exchange somewhere to also buy and sell and operate over in Asia, which makes you wonder why or how, who were the connections that he was able to do that.
I don't. Do you believe this story? Because I really don't believe the origin story that he cornered the kimchi arbitrage trade. I think it's a cover. All of it's off chain. It's sort of vague. He's never really elaborated on it. And if he did, I don't know why he would talk about it too much. What I do find interesting though is he pops up in 2018-ish with a bunch of money around when Epstein goes out of business ish. He pops up in the Caribbean and the Bahamas. What do you make of? I mean, and then even if he made $50 million on this kimchi trade, other participants in the market would have came in and squashed that trade just by bringing in more transactions and more eyes. And even if he made 50 million, where did he make the other billions during this crypto bear market? Essentially, it wasn't
right.
How. And then what do you make of sort of the Bahamas connection? Is there an Epstein connection here with sort of all these people down in the Bahamas and all this money and maybe what happened with Make or Die and the kid who died in Puerto Rico? I mean, do you see anything there?
Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, I didn't do super deep dive of like really all this. I do know for a fact though that his money came from somewhere, right? And with all the connections and Epstein money, perhaps he had that available to him. But I don't think that. I think he's so connected to the point where he's not going to be going to like jail, and there he's not going to like Epstein himself, or he won't get Epstein by any means. I think he's protected, and I think that he was a regulatory arm of Davos to try to regulate all the crypto exchanges that existed, and I think that's why CZ realized that, and I think that's why he started to sell the FTT token, because he essentially would have gotten in. He did get in on the FTT pre-mine as a shitcoiners do, or people of means in that position hear about their buddies launching a token and listing on your exchange and then selling it, whatever. So I think that he sold prematurely just to get away from the regulatory capture that him and that SBF and the SEC and just all the regulatory bodies in America were trying to leverage onto CZ. And not only that, I think that the banks in the United States kind of reached out to him as well, because again, it's all about destroying Davos money and destroying the offshore dollar markets. And as that liquidity is drying up, they are looking for other solutions and options. And that's where I think these stablecoins come in. Now, another thing, and I'm probably jumping the gun, but another point in this is, how as the Fed, the U.S. banks, how are they connected to Binance or BRICS even? because a lot of people within the United States have like China FUD. But again, I think it's just a conflict of interest, and people that are probably fighting China are probably a part of Davos that want to take over the global South. What's interesting, though, as I understand, Tether, USDT, Tether backs up a lot of the BNB token, which is what Binance offers. And unlike FTT, apparently there's utility behind it. I guess for whatever exchange discounts, whatever CZ offered with BNB. But the thing about Tether is that what I have come to is that Tether is a friend and ally of the banks, the U.S. banks, Team Fed, as I like to call it, the main shareholders of the Federal Reserve being like the 12 Fed regional banks, but also the big Wall Street banks, JP Morgan, Citi, all of that. And there is if you want to pull up the article that I send you, there's basically been a lawsuit with
Letitia James of
Letitia James. Basically, I see her as she is the New York Attorney General, but I see her as a Davos troll going after and suing these banks or entities that have created shell fronts to use and operate and trade in Tether, because Tether is actually issued $625 million loans in Tether, or just basically like the ability for people in New York to use and operate Tether. And I think that this is a way to provide liquidity for Bitcoin. And I'm not saying that Bitcoin is 100% like backed by Tether, but still, it's really interesting. And so you have kind of this one side of New York banks, and you have CZ and sure China, whatever, but are kind of like on this pro Tether side, and then you have Davos that are using things like FTT or whatever, but most notably USDC. USDC is the stablecoin out of Circle. USDC, the C stands for Circle, that company. And one of the main shareholders of that company is BlackRock, who was as World Economic Forum Davos you can get. BlackRock was basically this entity, hedge fund, not a bank, but given privilege as if it was a bank through the CARES Act that was passed during COVID and all this stuff, which gave them access to the Fed window, which only the privileged banks, the ones that buy up all the treasuries, get. And as people should understand from the other times that I've been on here, is that Davos and this whole World Economic Forum, like global communist plot, is to destroy the notion of the nation state by making corporations stronger than them. And by giving a hedge fund like corporation entity like BlackRock privilege, similar privilege that the banks has, completely undercuts the power that the banks do have. And so what way to put them back in their place other than to raise interest rates, which is what Powell is doing, and to bankrupt Davos and their access to all this offshore money, and also by destroying the stable coins that they have control over. So you can see that Team Fed and the New York banks are kind of in a way, they have control and leverage over Tether. And then you see all these other stable coins popping up like USDC, which are kind of Davos fronts, in the sense that USDC is Circle is owned by BlackRock. BlackRock is a front for the World Economic Forum Davos. And another thing to note is, I'll send you this article later as well, but there was a video in September by some guy, and there was an article that Binance was delisting all USDC pairings. What we're seeing here is a currency war. We're seeing a war of stablecoins and the dominance for them. So all of this is really recent to my understanding, but it's really starting to make sense. And originally I thought that, the Fed just wants to go after all of the stable coins, anything that is in competition with the dollar. But if they're already if they're already in control of Tether, which is like the largest market share of crypto dollars or stable coins, then it's kind of like they already had a front run on it. So this just further this is just another extension, another angle of the game of currency war and battle of central banks and the ballot of Davos versus the Fed that I hadn't seen. And a little glimmer of hope, I thought, the Fed trying to bankrupt BlackRock and all these people with the stable coins, I thought that would mean they would have to bankrupt Tether eventually. And so, maybe we see Bitcoin at like 11,000. But now I'm thinking maybe that's not going to be the case. Maybe it doesn't have to. If they're kind of reliant on having as much power and control over Tether, and also using Tether as a liquidity vehicle for Bitcoin. And so now this kind of comes to light, like, as Jerome Powell said in the past, he doesn't have a problem with Bitcoin. He has a problem with stablecoins or crypto, really. Things that are outside of the Fed's and the bank's control. So it's almost as if, like, Bitcoin is for enemies, remember. But it's kind of like Team Fed is also Team Bitcoin in a sense. And these Davos outfits, whether it's BlackRock or Vanguard or whoever, are just trying to make their stable coins that are in direct competition with them. So.
It's a lot there to unpack. I'm trying to get my head around sort of the stable coins. I'm curious how big the stablecoin market is. And
it's huge, especially if you look at Lynn Alden makes theirs all the time about how much they're how important they are to in third world countries. So
yeah, I definitely think they have utility,
especially when the world, as Tom likes to say, is biblically short dollars. You're going to want to run to as much of those as possible. Right. Which is ironic because we saw that USDC today, I think burned just means like cash out. But USDC, like people at Circle, were burning or cashing out the USDC they had $2 because as the Fed keeps raising rates, people are hungry for dollars. So it's kind of like this whole thing about the Fed raising rates and bankrupting Davos and their money, whether it's in not being able to fractionally reserve more euro dollars or offshore dollars, or they're being forced to make deal on whatever loans they have, and they're forced to burn or cash out their USDC holdings for actual fiat dollars. It seems like what the Fed's doing is working, and they're doing our job for us by bankrupting these euro commies.
Yeah, that all remains to be seen. I'm following the thread. I'm curious to see how it all plays out. Back to the stable coins, though. So I believe the initial investment from CZ and Binance into FTX was around $7 million, maybe in like 2018 or 2019. And then I think to buy that share out, SBF gave Binance $2 billion, and I think half of $1 billion in FTT tokens and $1 billion in BNB tokens. So it's interesting how they're each using each other's tokens to pay for things. But I also wonder around sort of like, we were talking about ODM, off dollar markets, and stable coins, and the ability to create these off dollar markets, kind of like the euro dollar. But I also wonder how much just having control of an exchange like this, whether it's CZ in China or FTX, and you're saying WEF, is just to watch all the money flows, to watch who's laundering money, to watch where money's going, to who's using what. I wonder if any of these stablecoins are any of them decentralized. From what I gather, the only one is DAI, might be decentralized, but the collateral was just basically, I think, centralized with an agreement with Coinbase, which I think it's kind of interesting there. So how much do you think countries are jockeying for these sort of cryptocurrency exchanges to watch what's happening on them?
Isn't the point to be able to not see what's happening? Like, I get that, like, there's still there's still crypto assets like on a public blockchain to where you can see. But I don't know. I mean, that's a
And then
so
I think,
can you expound on that? Because I actually haven't thought.
Well,
of
so
this.
I think also part of, I guess to expound on that a little bit is where what I saw on some tweet on the internet is that not only did FTX, was using, so in that mind too, when he was using FTT or even BNB token to pay Binance to buy a share of his company back, that might have been user funds. I have no idea. And we also know he was
it
sending,
definitely probably
was right, and he was using user funds at least to fund Alameda's business. And there though, I did see a tweet where it looked like 4 billion of Alameda's investments weren't even in, like, let's say Solana or other trades, were in, I think, 400 investments, like equity investments in small startups. And it looked like money laundering. It looked like almost like the sort of like, because all 400 of these companies in the court documents were less than 10 employees. They were all less than $10 million investments. You mean they couldn't have done the research on 400 companies? And so that looked like, okay, we invested 10 million here, which is really maybe that was a campaign bribe or campaign finance.
Or I mean, were they not like creations of their own? Because there were 134.
Right, I'm just saying that's just
under Alameda,
pure embezzlement. Who knows what kind of operations they were funding with these fake equity investments? This is what it looked like on paper.
Yeah.
And so my point there in terms of these stable coins and just being able to track all these funds and inflows and outflows, part of the currency war, I think, is part of that would be surveillance. Being able to track. I mean, if you run the exchange, you can see clearly the money coming in from Ukraine, where that's going after it comes out of the exchange, or different things like that through these projects. So I wonder how much these countries like China and CZ are we're jockeying for these exchanges or to have the lion's share of the market.
I mean, I was assume that one of the reasons why CZ sold FTT, like market sold, and crushed FTX was to be dominant with BNB. And it was in, I think, September that he announced that they were going to delist USDC. So there very much is a war of like the stable coins, of course.
Yeah. And then, so can you elaborate a little bit on the election connection and what you saw there, especially around, like you mentioned that they, FTX kind of crashed and burned on election day. And so some people were framing that up as maybe they were trying to sear it in everyone's, like really just burn the retail market, just burn everyone, burn it all down. Some saw it as a controlled demolition, maybe by the Fed.
Well, I mean, a controlled demolition would mean that it was controlled and burned down by Sam and friends himself, which I don't believe that was the case. I think, and like that is another one of the theories here, but I think that this was just like a complete hit job with coordination of CZ and the Fed and the banks, because I think that CZ was trying to escape regulatory capture, and he was trying to delist all the stablecoin pairings. So I think it only makes sense that that's what this was.
Right. And then how does Russia play into this then? And the US banks, are they aligned or not aligned?
No, they kind of are, because they're in BRICS, right? And I allude to this in the article, that just how there's a tacit coordination with, I guess, arguably China and the US banks. Before, there was already a tacit coordination with Russia and the Fed, because the Fed was starving Davos of their offshore dollar money. And then you also had Russia literally starving them of food, because they pulled out of the grain deal out of the UN, and they were already starving them of energy. And so again, it's basically Team Fed ran by American sovereigntists who have their interests in America and preserving the commercial banking sector. the largest lobbying or backer of lobbies and financer of lobbies in the world. And also, the BRICS nations, which are trying to preserve themselves in their own right, economically, internationally, actually live by their own national sovereignty and respect each other's international law as the UN, originally penned out. But now we have really since the UN, I'd argue that we now have this thing, as you'll hear from neocons, like this world-based order where basically the West decides what's going to happen, and you're going to have like blue gene democracy in every country. So it's just the Fed trying to preserve its banks and BRICS trying to preserve themselves as a nation. And they understand that they basically need to bankrupt these old European oligarchs. So this is just a battle. Taking out FTX was just another battle in the greater financial war.
Right. I want to go back to Tether. What do you make of maybe Bitcoiners who have an affinity for Tether? And when you've mentioned maybe Tether's been captured, do you mean that? How do you mean it's been captured? Do you mean like the leadership and sort of like the governance and direction, or the community, or the code somehow?
I guess whoever gives them the most business. I haven't looked that deep into it because, again, as of like yesterday, I was like, screw all stablecoins, take them all down, because I thought they were all offshore dollars. But if Team Fed is giving Tether a lot of business and potentially is providing a lot of liquidity for Bitcoin.
What does that mean when you say it's providing liquidity for Bitcoin, or they are? What does that mean?
Because like Team Fed out of New York, the New York banks are being extended this opportunity to work with Tether, or do business, like trade crypto within Tether, or trade crypto overseas by using Tether. If they're providing them like a lot of business, and it's just kind of like soft power control in my mind, I would say. So that's why I think, Tether coin, I thought was just kind of more of just strictly kind of like a Chinese outfit, but I don't think that's the case. I think it might be the stable coin that does work against Davos coin, whether that's through USDC or whatever else that they come up with.
Right. What do you think of SBF or Caroline? Have you watched any clips of their podcast appearances or anything like that?
Yeah, like the interview that Caroline did with those two other guys. And there was this I think the Substack is called Rounded Earth. Is it James Crawford? I forget. But I stumbled upon this let me see here. I stumbled upon a video. I'm pretty sure it's called Rounded Earth, and this guy kind of went through his theory and thesis on all this. But you could basically, he was explaining that you can kind of see in Caroline's appearance that this looks like someone who's having to, in a sense, compromise her morals and her values and what she's doing, and take these extra risks. And I think SBF and Caroline both kind of bought their own bullshit in a sense, as far as the effective altruism and going as risky as possible to just accrue as much wealth as possible. I mean, at the end of the day, it is kind of really sad in a sense, because they're probably extensions of their parents and all these other oligarchs, and using their children as vessels of continuing regulatory capture and power and control for whatever Malthusian agendas that they believe in. But I mean, I didn't get like too far into the weeds, because I think a lot of the story is just kind of set up as hand waving.
Yeah, I think they're pawns.
Exactly.
To be honest, I think they're puppets, and I think they sound like empty vessels to me the more I read their words or watch them on video. One thing I found interesting, I saw this Mark Cohodes interview, maybe on Hedgeye, and
I did watch that.
He brought up some really good points. I mean, like, you don't make a lot of money in markets without mentorship usually, without learning a particular angle or skill set or something from someone. And these guys came out of nowhere. And I mean, Caroline,
and you probably had to have money to make money as well.
I think they were given money. I think that they spun the money and they spun some yarns. I think that this was these markets were ripe for Ponzi schemes. I think they were able to wash trade things that they were invested in up and down and trade against their own clients and use their own clients' funds to take other risky bets or and to be honest, though, the way this is all panning out, though, this doesn't even seem like any of this was designed to be run as a legit thing from the start.
And so that's why you think it might have been controlled demolition to where they crashed it themselves?
No, I'm not saying they crashed it themselves. I think that they were along for the ride, maybe useful idiots. Maybe it wasn't.
But like
I don't even know if it was meant to crash at that time. I'm not saying that. There's just a lot of moving pieces here, a lot of competing interests. I do think that there are what I enjoy about this conversation and speaking to you is that I think some of these interests are aligned, whether they're conspiratorial or whether it's just mutual incentives. I do agree with that, and so that's very interesting. It's just there's so many layers to the onion here, but it's beyond farcical. Like from his tweeting after the fact to his Vox interview, which I don't know if he was thrown under the bus or it feels like a psyop the way he's allowed to continue to taunt retail and be in the conversation without consequence. And it seems like very much like you were saying, like he's so protected. And I don't know if that means he's going to take off the fat suit and show up somewhere else in a different country and be debriefed and reassigned. I don't know if he's a useful idiot. His parents are, just by their credentials, there's no way he would be acting like this. It's like the apple is so far from the tree. Nothing about the way he's acting has any sense of legal sense. His parents are Stanford lawyers or professors of law at Stanford. I know his mom has written some interesting articles about lack of consequence for the individual and different psychological sort of angles, but it just it seems way beyond the pale, his actions and behavior for him not to be protected, and to know he's not going to get off scot-free. I do think it was very interesting. I think one thing I agreed in his off the cuff interview with Vox or whatever you want to call that is I do think his biggest mistake from his perspective, not from ours, but his biggest mistake was filing Chapter 11. I think he would be way better off in different facets of his own life and have a little bit more control over how this is going to go if he didn't go into Chapter 11 and he was still at the wheel. And I think it would have been even more of a spectacle. I mean, the fact that Michael Lewis was embedded with them for 6 months. These guys were all living in like a $200 million compound. They were using...
Was Michael Lewis the poker lawyer?
Yeah, the poker lawyer, the money ball. The fact that they were using customer funds to buy like real estate for employees and advisors of the company in the Bahamas. I mean, this is just so beyond the sociopathic lying to the do-goodism as marketing, and then literally the complete fraud on the backside. I mean, this isn't he was running a profitable business and he made one bad trade or an employee went rogue. I mean, this is just going and going. I mean, the hack after the business files Chapter 11, which has got to be him or something close to him.
Right. I mean, again, I think he's just all just a distraction because he's that weird.
But there's a lot of smoke, and so I think there's something behind these distractions.
Yeah, that's my point.
It's I mean, I saw a video of I think what Congresswoman Maxine Waters blowing him a kiss, and now she's going to be overseeing the committee that's investigating this situation. Right,
and I heard that she's just gonna slow roll it and it's not gonna go anywhere. Like,
oh, I'm sure that sounds about right. I didn't even think about that. But where is Gary Gensler in this?
I have no idea. I mean, he's been quiet for probably a reason.
Is he pro Bitcoin or
No, he's an enemy of Bitcoin. He's
an
Davos
enemy
through
of
and through.
Bitcoin? I never heard that angle. What makes you think he's Davos? I'm not saying he is. I'm just asking.
Just from what I've heard as far as what he has done and not being a proponent of just like regulation as far as helping out the retail, and just I can't pinpoint anything specifically other than just hearing that he has. I mean, he was appointed through the Biden administration, was he not?
I mean, just the fact that, I mean, if FTX is Davos aligned and he was meeting with FTX, I mean, this is like a wolf in sheep's clothing.
I mean, yeah, if he had ties with Caroline's parents,
which he does. I mean, he worked with or for her dad at MIT, I believe. They were both professors, and I believe he was the department chair.
Yeah. And I mean, his course is like heavy, like blockchain, like just like the words and terminology that he used. Like, I know this isn't like
pro Bitcoin at times. I'm not saying like a max or anything like that, but like he seems to get the nuance of Bitcoin being decentralized and the immaculate origin story of Satoshi. He's alluded to that a little bit, but I think this whole saga with FTX has shown that he's, you know, I got into this conversation with Pete Rizzo about, you know, what is the role of regulators here? And, you know, I'm not saying the state should come in and save everybody. I'm not saying the state should, I'm not pro-regulation, but I do think there are laws, and I think some of these laws make sense. And I think when you talk about predatory finance, which is what I think some or a lot of these crypto projects are, and I put crypto there in quotes because I don't think they're actually cryptographic. I think they're illegal securities. I think that they're using predatory practices. And I think after the fact, and I think some of these things have been criminal, like FTX, then I think they should face the consequences. I'm not saying we should have the thought police come out and stop everybody from doing anything beforehand, but I mean, it looks like an obvious crime here, and it looks like an ongoing crime.
Yeah, I mean, again, I would just trace back to who he's involved with.
So where do you think regulation goes now? Do you think they're talking about bringing forward the bill that's SBF was working on with Gary Gensler, I believe, and Congress to regulate crypto?
And again, like, that's why I think he was like Gensler's Davos, because he tried. I mean, because we know that SBF was like, there's a quote where basically he said that he doesn't want to what was it? It was like he doesn't want to have to be forced to have regulation. He wants to ask for permission. And so, I mean, where else do you go other than the head of the SEC? And I think him going to just like force CZ to be compliant, I think that's just another part of like a global control of, you know, any crypto dollars that could be created.
Right. And so what do you think this is going to mean for society at large? Do you think we're going to get a CBDC here in America?
No.
I know they just rolled out a 12-week project, it sounds.
No, absolutely not. Yeah, we can talk all about that if you like.
Yeah.
You know, I even wrote a thread on this too recently. Just plain and simple, this is a wholesale CBDC to update the settlement of reserves between commercial banks and probably replace SWIFT. That's all this is. The thing that everybody is afraid of is arguably what USDC would maybe slow roll or play around with, but is a retail CBDC, which is like from the Fed or the central bank to your pocket, right? There's no intermediary of the commercial banks. The commercial banks will be taken out entirely if there is a retail CBDC, because that is what Davos essentially wants to have happen, because they want to be in control of the issuance of money for the entire globe. Right now, the commercial banks are, because money's created through them, the monetary transmission mechanism, a la loans being issued to people. And so that's basically how, I don't think it's so much like taxes that creates infrastructure. I think it's actual, the creation of private capital, which is what the banks want to contain. And capitalism, as we understand it, as much that we can knock it, it's not perfect, but I think it's actually moving in the right direction, especially if we have free market rates based on the transaction and whatever the banks charge each other in the United States, which is, SOFR, and away from LIBOR, as I've talked about and other people have talked about on the show. And so the commercial banks aren't going to bend over to Davos, because Davos wants that. They want everybody to default on their sovereign debt and have it IMF issued CBDC, and everybody's just like a slave to that one global currency. Or maybe it doesn't even have to be global, but still a slave to a currency through a central bank, and get rid of the commercial banks, because they're essentially communists and they want to control the means of production, or at least the means of finance. Right now, the banks do. And as we saw a few weeks ago, Jamie Dimon basically, because you have to remember that CBDC is in tow and in line with this whole, we need to have the central banks put on their mandate climate change as well. And Jamie Dimon and his buddies basically stood up and said, hell no, that will literally pave the road to hell for America, as we saw him say to Rashid Tlaib. So a CBDC is lockstep with the same green agenda, and they will not divest from oil investments. They will not just give up whatever power and control that they have of capital markets and the creation of private capital.
Okay. What about, this is fascinating. What about Ethereum as both a platform, for running stablecoins, and, in and of itself, the platform, is this a part of this currency war? Or one of these two?
I mean, no, I forget. Does Tether have its own blockchain, or is it built on Ethereum?
Tether, I think, runs on multiple blockchains. It's run on Ethereum. I think it's ran on Tron at times. I
right.
keep up on this technology.
I don't either.
I think it's
just
fascinating.
To speak on Ethereum, I mean, I can't remember if it's Stellar or Consensus, whatever, but like a big Ethereum like company.
Consensus is the sort of their hub network thing.
Sure. I don't know. JP Morgan like basically owns one of them.
Yeah. JP Morgan's been in on Ethereum from the beginning.
Yeah. But again, this is like the commercial banks trying to stick around and survive for as long as possible, right? So they're going to try to buy up and destroy any competition that they have. So as far as Ethereum goes, it's a shit project. And Jamie Dimon probably understands that. People that are presidents at banks probably understand that, but they want to have control over it so they can offer those services and take a VIG, take a fee off of it. Because these banks are going to try to stay relevant, amidst like the rise of crypto, right? So that's how I see it. I mean, Ethereum as a platform, as we all know, is Bitcoiners. And as probably a lot of people in the Senate, or it was just like in the higher echelons on Washington, probably understand that Bitcoin should be treated as a commodity instead. And that's like the real deal. It's probably going to go on the Fed's balance sheet at some point. And will probably be utilized by all the like pro, like, the gas people and the energy people to basically flare it in and mine it and not burn your money away. So they're pro Bitcoin and they're just like pro the other shit coins, because again, we understand that shit coins are centralized and they want to be the central planners of the centralized coins. So I don't think Ethereum really like Davos loves it. The World Economic Forum loves it, but how much you can love it as much as you want, but how much are you in control of it?
Yeah.
If JP Morgan's got a stranglehold on that.
Right. What I think is just really interesting about Ethereum right now, though, is with the merge and this upgrade, I guess. I wouldn't call it an upgrade, but just this process they're going through. There are many people staking their ETH, and I didn't even realize this because again I don't follow Ethereum too closely, but you can't unstake your ETH, and that sounds like to me FTX not even 2.0, 3.0. When that could be a huge rug pull.
Wait, they what their
You
they
can't
what stake their ETH?
unstake the ETH. There's no unstaking date in the smart contract that.
Sorry, what do you mean on stake?
So when you stake your ETH, the smart contract ethers, that's what they call themselves, are using, that smart contract has no release date, no on-staking date. So you have millions of ETH being staked with no set release date. Originally, it was going to be like when they rolled this out, around a year. Now they're talking about maybe 2 or 3 years before you can on-stake your ETH. Now, you just think about sort of the economics of that, or the game theory is like, so if you can't on-stake your ETH for 2 years, at some point, if they make an announcement that you can on-stake your ETH in 6 months, there'll be a rush to the gate on the people who don't have staked ETH to beat that on staking, because once all that on-staked ETH comes out, I mean, you're flooding the market again with people, basically people who couldn't have sold. And
wait, so basically, as you like on staking means that like in 2 years, then they'll be able to take their ETH back away from stake.
That date's not set. They're debating it. It's now at 2 or 3 years.
So basically, they've locked their ETH for a year, and now they're probably going to say another year.
Oh yeah, they've already said 2-3 years, I believe. And there's no exit in sight. There's no set timetable. But you think about it, if there's 10 million ETH staked, they're not going to on-stake all of them at once either. There's going to be like some sort of lottery system, like 1 million will be unstakeable at this date, and the next million. So, I mean, that's all political to me. That's all. You don't know what batch you're going to be in. You don't know when your ETH's going to be unstaked. And at some point, they might never unstake it. I mean, we get closer to never every day. It's not been unstakeable. I mean, how do you get consensus on this on staking date? I mean,
it
it's
like
the ultimate rug pull. I mean, I believe that Vitalik's killing Ethereum slowly so that from a legal perspective, he doesn't go to jail right away and looks like a scam. If it dies slowly, it looks like it died organically. And I think ETH 2.0 is sort of that roadmap of how to kill ETH slowly. So, it's just fascinating because, in terms of crypto, and I put that again in quotes, but that market's just going to get rug pulled when either that staking date gets pushed out, that on staking date, or just never comes, and it becomes apparent that it's never going to come. So.
Yeah, man, it's a shit show. I wish I could speak more on this, but I don't. I didn't even know any of that you just went through.
Yeah, I mean, I'm doing my own research, as we all should, and it's just fascinating. I mean, the FTX thing, it just seems now in retrospect how much what was considered smart money or just people who had money got involved in this. It seems like all of it was a setup. The way they were able to track so much easy money, the way, there are anecdotal stories of people who didn't do due diligence because he was on the cover of Fortune, and sort of that whole. And I've studied this as an accountant, and I've seen entrepreneurs who've used sort of marketing or trust to have people lower their guard. And it's just an entire industry has lowered their guard. But you bring up these fascinating larger players here that are swimming like sharks in the background. As people are losing their life savings in Solana in the retail market. The Fed and Davos and China are jockeying over stablecoins and off-dollar markets. So definitely a fascinating angle. It's always a pleasure chatting with you, Phil. I love this perspective. I'll leave it to you for any parting words or thoughts, and definitely let people know where they can find you and your work.
Yeah, man. This is probably the story of, I don't know, the year, obviously, the decade. because that like there are just so many different angles on this, and it's the more that we learn about it, the more maybe our like theses will change. Like this is quite something. But yeah, if anybody wants to follow my musings and whatnot, I'm Mr. Pseu on Twitter, MRPSEU. I'll just type in Phil Gibson, my Substack, where I wrote this article, and now probably like 2 articles a week, one on Friday, which is just kind of anything I feel like writing about in macro geopolitics, and then the Sum Report, which comes out on Sunday, is just a summary of things that you missed in the past week in geopolitics and macro. But that's QPOL, 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 and yeah, this is what I like to get autistic about, and I'm glad that you.
I didn't mean to cut you off. I think the parallels to Madoff are astounding here. And I think this is going to be a lot bigger than Madoff. But what I find fascinating is we know a lot more, I think, already than about that situation. I think Madoff has gotten away with the idea that he acted alone. And I don't think there's any way that SBF acted alone and coordinated any of these activities that we've talked about.
Yeah.
I think there's just a lot bigger players above him. I don't think he had the life experience. I don't think he had the desk experience to do any of this stuff. And it all
like I think at the end of the day, they're just gonna blame him as a like incompetence, I guess, because he is young, even though that he is smart.
We didn't even
dude, probably
touch on his
but
brother.
He'll actually like make off, or he'll get off.
I think he's gonna make off.
See him in jail.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to jail. We didn't even bring up his brother, who started guarding against pandemics.
I heard that.
He worked for Sean Katzen, who's congressman out of Illinois, who's on the Digital Assets Committee. Before that, most of the money from guarding for pandemics came from SBF. So I thought that was fascinating as well. And just that sort of whole agenda, the veganism, the fake meat, the pandemics, and there were a couple others, but it almost seems just like a Bill Gates Foundation project or protege.
Yeah. I mean, all of these commie weirdos have their idiosyncrasies and their ideologies. And again, it's kind of like in the utilitarian idea of like, like whatever bullshit we have to shove down people's throats to accomplish like what we really want. I mean, it's Davos through and through. Like whatever weird angle they're coming at it from, at the end of the day, it's just a bullshit narrative for them to make us live under their totalitarianism. And like that's why like I understood that, and I didn't really like, I'm glad people are doing that work in the background. But again, I just kind of came and built on the thesis I've adopted and did this 30,000 foot view of like, okay, is Davos money versus Fed money and this extension, and maybe Davos is like pro Tether, and that's why maybe the Fed is pro Tether, and that's why you have Davos lawyers suing the banks for using Tether, because again, that's another extension of the offshore dollars that they actually don't have control over. So it's just a theory, could be completely wrong. Time will tell. Yeah, at the end of the day, it's kind of follow the money. You can get as granular in that as you like.
Yeah, follow the money. And Do Kwon, Alex Mashinsky, and SBF are not in jail.
Yeah.
And Ross Ulbricht and Julian Assange are. Kind of a sad state.
Shame.
It's a damn shame, my friend. Thank you so much, Phil. It's been so dope.
You bet.
I want to thank Phil Gibson for coming on the show. I want to thank our sponsors, River Financial and Crowd Health, for powering the Bitcoin Matrix. And I also want to thank all of you listeners who continue to support the show, whether that's watching the show on Apple, YouTube, or streaming it for sats, value for value style on the Fountain app. Matt Odell, Alex Svetsky, and Jeff Booth are all up next. Stay humble, stack sats, and be laser focused out there. This is Cedric. Peace.